Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Keeping a pregnancy a secret is not easy. It's especially hard to hide online as you search for everything about what it's like to be pregnant, you have to buy for the baby. But when Jia Tolentino was expecting her second child, she made it her mission not to let Google know about the pregnancy. She called it her hidden pregnancy experiment. Jia Tolentino is a staff writer with the New Yorker magazine, and she wrote about her experiment in that magazine. Jia, good morning.
Morning.
Congratulations on the baby.
Oh, thank you.
Why did you do this? Why did you want to go on this experiment of hiding your pregnancy online?
Something that I think about a lot is that every time we get on our phones, every time we look at something on our computer, there is this vast hidden network of companies, data brokers, ad companies that are tracking our every move and are buying and selling and trading information on who we are and what we might buy and what our politics might be and what other companies might nudge us to do. And this is a much bigger economy than I think people realize. The industry for location data, it's worth $18 billion a year alone. And I think, this is part of the reason that we all kind of feel vaguely bad when we use our phones so much, right? Like, I think there's this sense, the writer Shoshana Zuboff calls this surveillance capitalism, that it's these industries that take the kind of raw material of human experience and life and want and need and turn it into, these vast profit centers for all of these companies. And anyway, I think about this a lot and it bothers me. And I wanted to see if I could just withhold something important from it for a little bit, right? Like, I wanted to just see if I could remember what it was like to put a little bit of distance between my psyche and the object that knows every passing whim that it has, let alone like the most important things that are happening in my life.
How did you go about hiding your pregnancy from the online world?
I don't have any smart devices already. I've already disabled Siri. I've disabled passive listening on every app on my phone, and I don't have very many of them. I've turned off location tracking. I've turned off, I've turned off all these permissions, as many permissions on as many apps as I can. And I set some rules. I told myself, okay, no Googling anything related to pregnancy, no buying anything related to babies. And the same went for my husband, because our IP addresses and our sort of unique digital identifiers that all of these ad companies use to aggregate and track all of our online, activity are me and my husband's identifiers were linked. So we just abstained from asking Google things and from buying things, basically.
How difficult is that to do when a baby is on the way?
Well, it was my second pregnancy, which made it a lot easier. Okay. I don't know if I would have been able to do it with my first, but also, that alone was a really useful existential experiment to say, what would it be like to have a question and not immediately ask Google, which is now aggregating results via AI, right? Like, what would it be like to sit not knowing something for even 5 minutes, and ask a friend or ask, my doula or somebody, or just ask a doctor or say, maybe I don't need to know the answer to this. I was experimenting in this space as well. That was also part of it, right? Like, for these data brokers and ad companies, identifying an expectant parent, an expectant mother specifically, is more than 200 times as valuable to them as identifying a person in general, because expectant parents tend to purchase so much stuff. And I also think a lot about how, I think North American society often prepares people for parenthood by just inducting them into a new consumer category rather than all the other things that one might think about when preparing for a baby. And I kind of wanted to just place some resistance between myself and that as well.
How different was that from the first time that you were pregnant?
Well, pregnancy, it has a way of eroding your freedom and your privacy. This has become very literal in America, in many states in the last 2 years with the repeal of Roe. The surveillance, the criminal surveillance of pregnancy, the absolute erosion of medical and existential freedom is very, very real in that sense. But, there's just this ordinary thing where you're pregnant, you are out, you order a cup of coffee, a glass of wine, you get a second look, right? Like, it's just that people will start reaching their hands towards your body and, telling you about how boys and girls are really, really different, right? And I had managed to dodge a lot of the social construction of pregnancy the first time I was pregnant because the pandemic hit. And so I was a little lonely, but it was also amazing. It was amazing to experience pregnancy only as my body wanted to experience it. It was this sort of psychedelic feeling of autonomy. And I sort of, now that I was back in the real world where I'm schlepping on trains and visibly showing, I kind of wanted to see if I could carve back some sense of privacy again.
You said something interesting that I want to go back to, which is that there's this report showing that a single pregnant woman is as valuable to data brokers as knowing the age, gender, and location of more than 200 non-pregnant people.
Right.
That's extraordinary to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it also points to, there is an enormous amount of data being aggregated about us, and it's also not always accurate, right? Like, that almost makes it worse, right? You ask any woman that has gone through infertility or who has miscarried and still gets targeted with ads that think that they are an expectant mother for months, right? And I think, it also speaks to the construction of what being a new parent is. So much of that socially is, oh, here's all this new stuff you have to get. You prepare by buying and buying and buying. And I find I take issue with that in some way too.
You also, in this piece, you talk about, and part of this is about what it means to be a new parent. You talk about the technology that exists now. Baby monitors, nanny cams that are, hidden away in a teddy bear, these smart socks that babies sleep in. What is the connection between those devices and what Shoshana Zuboff has called surveillance capitalism?
Right. So there is this growing idea, I think, in contemporary life that tracking everything about our lives, our steps, the people that walk by our front doors, that tracking and surveilling will keep us safe and will allow us to improve our lives. It's part of the thing that pushes us to accept the ubiquity of surveillance on our phones and in other aspects of life, I think. And one of the ways that this gets incepted into, I think, our worldview is when people become parents, you are presented with this plethora of sort of smart devices that surveil your baby, ostensibly with the idea that this will make them safer, even though there's little to no data on any of these devices that they improve medical or otherwise outcomes for babies at all. But of course, you understand, of course, you'd want to buy something that will keep an eye on your baby while you're sleeping and use AI to detect signs of distress and beep your phone to wake you up. Of course, you'd want that because, what is more urgent and intimate than the desire to keep a baby safe? And, who's more vulnerable than a 2-week-old, right? I understand so completely why these devices are so attractive, but they don't keep people any safer. They don't measurably make babies any safer. And I'm talking about, there are specific uses of some of these devices for preterm or, babies with specific medical needs. But I'm talking about, these devices are generally just marketed to parents of healthy, full-term babies. And I think, as with many of these devices of the surveillance economy, let's say the Ring camera, and even social media, which is, an artifact of the self-surveillance economy, I think that they create the anxieties that they say that they're going to soothe, right? The smart sock that have sold 1 million plus devices that track and monitor the heart rates of 1 million plus babies. This device was not invented because of an urgent medical need that only it could fit. It was invented because of an anxiety that it almost calls into existence by existing.
I mean, have you changed how you think about this? Because I think it's for people who have read your book or read what you've written for The New Yorker or follow you on social media or what have you. You lived a fairly public life.
Yeah, I'm an extremely open person, and I wrote that way, and I lived my online life that way. And then sometime around the time I was writing my book, I started thinking, how can I withdraw? How can I make myself less useful to the surveillance economy, which I think is very obviously existentially damaging, to civic life, to personal life, to everything. And then my book came out and I became even more public, and I said, okay, I have to do this even more. I have to withdraw even more. It wasn't specifically this experiment, but I do think, if you know that there are entities making money off of you that you would rather not be making money of you, how can you withdraw some of that value from these companies? That's just been a question that has been in the back of my mind. I think a lot of us, we know we're being surveilled. We make jokes about the FBI agent in our phone, et cetera, right? But we feel pretty powerless. There's a statistic, I think there was a Pew survey that said over half of us, and often myself included, generally do not even look at a word of a privacy policy before clicking agree, right, or submit. And so many people have gotten off social media in the last 5-10 years. We've realized that the companies are getting much more out of us than we are getting out of them. And I think it's just useful anytime you can remember that there is space usually to withdraw. your attention, to withdraw your data, to withdraw these little pieces of yourselves that are being mined by, entities that you can't see.
So you withdrew your information when it comes to being pregnant from the internet and all the tentacles of the internet. How successful were you in hiding your pregnancy?
I managed to hide from the ad trackers. My barometer was like, once I see an ad for a baby carrier pop onto Instagram, which I'm still on, then you'll know that you have been tagged as a pregnant person. And I managed to get to like 5 months, and I was like, it seems like I've succeeded. I'm not getting ads for anything baby related, and which, to that point, everyone thinks Instagram is listening. It perhaps seems to be that other apps are listening and then feeding that data through these ad companies to your identifier on Instagram. But I was talking about pregnancy around my phone constantly. And, it never pulled up on Instagram. I just have all the other things turned off. And
so they never found out?
Yeah, seemingly, right? I don't think like if I was trying to hide my pregnancy from a prosecutor, had I gotten an abortion, like that, I had texted about it a lot. But I do think I managed to hide it from data brokers till, 5 months, 6 months, which is when I called a privacy expert and said, did I actually do this? And she said, I think you might have, when ad companies know something about you, immediately, right? Like everyone has had the experience of looking at something online and then having it follow you around your own internet for 3 weeks, right? And I was like, great, I succeeded. I immediately, ended the phone call, bought maternity pants, and ads for baby stuff took over my feeds for the remainder of my pregnancy.
Within minutes of you making that purchase.
Minutes. Yeah, my friends were joking, like your phone is just rolling its eyes and waiting for you to admit, that's like, we know. But, the economy that surveils our decisions, it is extremely efficient. Anytime you see an ad online, there has been a transaction around your own unique digital identifier to show you exactly what these companies think you should see. It is quite sophisticated, and, it works in real time. It tracks in real time. It exchanges data in real time. I wasn't surprised that within instantly, my profile was was updated in the ether to say, oh, this is a pregnant person. Maybe she'll buy stuff.
Having gone through this, what is the lesson that you would take away from what you pulled off?
I think in one way it was like, well, I hid this one little thing, but I'm still being tracked about everything else. Like in some way, there was no true enormous takeaway that I could somehow change the grip of surveillance economy on our existence. But I would say, the takeaway for me was that it is possible. It's always possible to put a little bit of distance, a little bit more distance between yourself and these companies that track you. It's possible. And if you want to experiment with this in any form, I recommend it.
Your kids are still really young. Could
Yes.
you ever imagine, as they get older, one of the things you can do when they get phones, if they get phones, is you can see where they are, you can track where they are, you can track what they're doing online, what have you. Have you ever been considered, would you consider that? Is that at all tantalizing in the back of your mind as they get older?
Well, I think there's also a growing discourse about, that has been almost in some way led by members of Gen Z who have been sort of tracked and surveilled by their parents and by these companies, for much of their lives, and are talking about how damaging this has felt to their psyche. And at the same time, as a parent of young kids, I know that I will be scared once my children have phones of their own and access to anything they want on this terrifying internet. I don't discount the care that the base motivation of tracking your child's dot on your phone or checking their internet search history every single day, like that is fundamentally motivated by a true desire to protect and safeguard. But I also think about when I was a kid and how often I was unsupervised and how often I was, and as a teenager, as a college student, how often I was in genuinely situations that I'm sure my parents didn't like, that I would travel to other countries without a cell phone and be there for 2 months, that I would just leave the house as an elementary schooler and ride my bike with no phone, no trackability. And I was allowed to do that. And that sort of independence and the freedom from any sort of third-party surveillance for most of the important moments of my life, I think that does feel really foundational to an instinct that I'm very glad I have, and a sense of independence that I've carried into many aspects of my life. And I hope that as a parent, I can grant my children as much of that as I possibly can.
Jia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jia Tolentino is a staff writer with The New Yorker. Her essay is The Hidden Pregnancy Experiment. She's also the author of an excellent book called Trick Mirror.